Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I work only at the moment on a contract with the city. I work through the Centre of Criminology at the University of Cape Town. Although I'm actually a lapsed medievalist, but I saw the error of my ways about 20 years ago, and I started working in safety projects, community safety. So right now, it's myself on the ground, supported by my colleague, Professor Clifford Shearing, who is, I have to say, internationally established and respected criminologist. I'm very much a Johnny-come-lately in this matter. And we have this contract with the city coming to the end of three years now. Not for the first time. Previously, we've had a series of shorter contracts. And I just want to step back from that detail and just start again at what do we think we're doing, we're thinking of, or what are we saying when we think about safety. Because safety has two aspects. There's safety from things, right? And in a school, for example, it might be safety from gangsters coming over the fence or knocking down the fence or bringing in drugs to sell, intimidating people, etc. You want safety from a whole lot of things. But that's not enough. You have to have a vision of safety to do what? Safety for what? And the overall vision, I guess, is a school in which teaching and learning can take place as fully and as wholly as possible, right? That's what you want safety for, okay? And we sometimes, not just around schools, but in terms of safety altogether, we sometimes get a little hooked on getting panicky about the stuff we got to keep out, which is very good for the alarm manufacturers and barbed wire manufacturers, etc. But it doesn't actually go very far to saying, what are we doing it for? So, we've been doing work for a number of years, Clifford Shearing for 40 years, and myself for the last 22 years, in thinking about how is safety created in any given place, right? And one of the basic things is that safety is created by many, many different kinds of activities, by many, many different kinds of people. What Oscar talks about as the whole of society approach. Now, we have started with the city about 10 years ago with a program which is called Neighborhood Safety Officers, NSOs for short. We borrowed this from Amsterdam, where Clifford visited and found this extremely interesting, because these are police officers whose main function is not to go around arresting people and slapping on fines, but rather to try and understand what's going on in the community. Their motto is know and be known. So their job is to build relationships, build understanding, get to know all the dynamics of the community, and act as facilitators. They don't have to do everything themselves, but they need to know who to ask, who to refer people to, in order to create greater safety in the community. They are, of course, supported by their much more obviously policing-type colleagues that they can call in if they need their support. But I remember talking to Marcel Zethoven, our first contact from Amsterdam when he came over, and he said, I suppose this is basic to any policing. When you're a police officer and someone approaches you or you approach them, your first wish is to be, I want to be your friend. I'd rather be your friend than not. But if that person steps out of line, there's immediately a switch to the enforcement mode. And you need both, right? You can't just achieve safety by going around arresting people, by catching drug lords, because another one's going to spring up in their place, right? We have all these headlines about, 3 million rands worth of confiscated on the road on the way to Mossel Bay or something. That's peanuts. It's nothing. We are absolutely surrounded by, now that we are back in the world, as it were, after years of isolation under apartheid, we immediately became an amazing what shall I say, depot and exchange place for international drugs in a big way. And the whole point of the whole idea of prohibition and the war on drugs is an obvious and horrific failure. We have to start thinking differently about it. However, that's a topic for another time, and let me get specifically to schools. The neighborhood safety officers, their job was to get to know a particular neighborhood, and we started in Gordons Bay, including Temperance Town, Crossroads, who was the third one? Ooh, my mind's Muizenberg, because both Clifford and I happened to live there, and it has very active civic associations. We thought we'd explore what it's like for such an officer to be in a place where there is so much going on. And it has since expanded terribly, terribly slowly, and we only have about 15 neighborhood safety officers. But there is still the plan, which J.P. Smith was just confirming again at a meeting yesterday morning, that ideally we would like to have a neighborhood safety officer in every ward in Cape Town, starting, of course, with the ones that are the most disrupted and dangerous places. Within a neighborhood, within virtually every neighborhood, there will be a school. So they have already been supporting schools, linking with them as far as possible. But a couple of years after the NSO started, we brought in something called school resource officers. Now, this came as an idea from the United States, and I need to say at once, even though we got one idea from Amsterdam and another from the United States, we're not being recolonized here, right? We are looking for places where good things happen and seeing if there's something about them that we could use and make it our own, right? So we are in the process of what you might call indigenizing good ideas from anywhere and seeing how can it help us right here, right now. So Muni Warini, this is not a new colonization. So the school resource officers, as I say, in American and Canadian, and in schools of high-risk areas or high-risk schools, and as Oscar's pointed out, they're not necessarily the same thing. And it started in Metro Police. Bear in mind that in Cape Town, municipal policing has these three divisions: Metro Police, law enforcement, and traffic. It's all very confusing sometimes. Metro Police are quite small and shrinking even, partly because of the threat by national government that all Metro Police officers might in due course be absorbed into SAPS. However, their motto is crime prevention, and they spend a lot of time in operations collaborating with SAPS on the ground. Law enforcement is to do with bylaws, all the kind of everyday things that make a difference to one's daily life if they're not dealt with. From barking dogs to informal trading to liquor, illegal liquor licensing, prostitution, there's a vice squad, all these special squads of law enforcement. And then traffic is self-explanatory, I think. So it started in the Metro Police. After a couple of years, they decided they didn't want it. It was turned over to law enforcement, who've been running it ever since. And it started in 6 very particularly identified schools that had safety problems. It has since gone to 18 scattered schools around. And the difference that started beginning of last year, which I'm going to spend more time talking about, is that another whole group of them have been put into schools in one particular area. That is Delft. Delft is a big place, and it has, I think, 22 schools. And part of the aim of the program is to see that every school in Delft, primary school and high school, had 2 safety officers deployed to it. Who are these people? They have been a combination of people recruited from local communities, trained as auxiliaries, on the basis of the EPWP, the Extended Public Works Program, right? Which has limited payment and limited time. So it's a bit of a stopgap kind of way, and it is not good for a permanent basis for keeping schools safe. However, there are, as I say, 44 SROs in Delft. And this is part of the city's decision in the Directorate of Safety and Security to try, instead of spreading the city's resources thinly all over Cape Town, which would make them almost invisible, rather consolidating as far as possible in areas that need it most. And the areas that were identified, there were 10 of them that were identified a couple of years ago in the planning for this, were on the basis of murder statistics and violence, which are the places in Cape Town that are the most violent. And let's try out in one of them a model building exercise, which started in January last year in Delft, to see what kind of difference can be made if we bring a whole lot of resources together in one place instead of scattering them around. So, as I say, all schools in Delft have neighborhood safety officers from the beginning of last year. There are also 4 neighborhood safety officers, the Metro Police ones in Delft. In addition, there are other auxiliaries, young law enforcement people, known as the Stabilization Unit, the SU. I'm not a very good head for figures, but there's supposed to be about 50 of them in Delft. Together with dedicated traffic officers for Delft, and also then, of course, because it is seen as very much a kind of flagship program for the city, they are then linked to all the other units that are on call. So even though something like the Gang and Drugs Task Team and the Liquor Unit of law enforcement aren't directly part of this neighborhood safety team, which is what it's called, they are there to be called on when required. Right. So what is the role of the neighborhood safety, of the school resource officers in particular? Their job, to put it very simply, is to help to make the school a place where learning and teaching can happen, right? They are not simply security guards. They're not replacements for the Bambanani that were there. They're more trained than Neighborhood Watch are. They have weapons training, for example. They're trained in bylaws. And we're just in the process now, arising out of our 1-year experiment and model building in Delft. We're now in the process, through law enforcement, with the Metro Police Academy, engaged in rethinking how can their training be strengthened to be even more effective in their schools. So they started there at the beginning of January last year. I've been large part of my job on this contract has been to keep in contact with them, to go and observe, to speak to the school resource officers themselves, to speak to the principals, to speak to whoever is around and say, what's going on? Is it working? How is it going? And in the last few weeks, since the beginning of this semester or this term, the school term, I've been specifically going to school principals and saying, you've had these SROs there for a year now. Has it made a difference? Now, there are varied responses. At one end, there was a principal, actually not in Delft, it's one of the more isolated ones, and I'll come back to that, who had very little respect for the SROs, apparently, nor his staff. I was told by the SRO when I went to visit that she and her colleague had gone into a hall in the school where a Valentine's Day celebration was happening within the school. The 2 of them, who are dressed in law enforcement blue uniforms, went in and stood there. They'd been there for some time, years in fact, and a teacher, and excuse the language, teacher turned to them and said, "Jay, fuck off." Sorry. And told them to go out and patrol the perimeter or something, treating them as if they're the most basic kind of security guard. A little later, they went out there, they tried to explain that they're there to help keep them safe if anything happened. A little while later, a couple of teachers came running out to them, saying, come back, we need you. Now, there's something happening in that school that needs to be dealt with. And that's fortunately an extraordinary exception in my experience. When I went to talk to the assembled principals of Delft in late 2017, and I could just see on their faces the kind of skepticism that I see also on some of your faces. And I came back towards the end of last year. I went to one of the schools, which consists entirely of temporary structures, but is an amazing school with an extraordinary atmosphere, a very positive vibe to it. And the principal said to me, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I didn't think anything was coming of that. But he said, no, we just can't do without you. It has made such a difference to our school. See, these young people, these are mostly young law enforcement officers, whose training is not nearly what it should be yet. But the mere visible presence of them in the schools has had an effect. Even if they did nothing other than just kind of walk around in their uniforms. Right? I'm told that from a couple of the schools where there are gangsters all around them who used to be coming through. They just don't come. When they see the van there and they see them, they don't bother. They just don't. Interestingly, one of the schools I went to recently said, yeah, that has been the case. Since beginning of last year, we haven't had people coming in. We've been able to have peace in the school, that we can get on with building the kids and ourselves. But he said, actually, both of those SROs were absent on the same day for a couple of days recently, and immediately the people were back, immediately. So this is not just some kind of temporary thing. Law enforcement have taken this on very seriously now, and we're just in the process, they are, with whatever support I can give them, are building much more secure support and monitoring mechanisms, more inspectors who actually understand that the officers are not just security officers. So what are they starting to do beyond just being visible? It takes time. When you think of the reputation of police officers, whatever uniform they're wearing, in many of these most difficult communities, no, what the heck are they doing here, right? The change that I've been able to observe in so many of the schools in Delft has been quite remarkable, where from being seen as hostile, they're now being seen as, one principal after another says, well, they're just part of the family here now. And you see kids going up to them now and asking them questions. It's an extraordinary thing. In January, I visited one of the principals, a high school in Delft, and we had a long conversation about what the experience had been and what still needed to be done to make it work even better. And she said she, like many principals, went into a couple of her classrooms recently just to find out how things are going, have a general chat. And she asked them, what do you want? She went to the grade 8s and 9s, and she asked them, what do you want to do when you leave school? And she said, well over half of the kids said, I want to go into law enforcement. And I thought, there's something, considering the probable assumptions of those kids, this is really remarkable. No, it's obviously not all of them will, but it's a sign of building trust, right? And this is so important for them to function at all. And clearly in that other school that I mentioned, which is very exceptional, that trust had not happened. And it takes time. And one of the things that we also, because this is, as I say, this is a model building exercise, right? Throwing a whole lot of resources into one area and seeing if it makes a difference. We're already planning to be starting the next one, which is going to be in Bonteheerval, Valhalla Park and Bishop Lavis, probably getting off the ground slowly from June onwards. And then this neighborhood safety team, that'll be NST2. And we're already talking about 3, 4, and 5, perhaps later in the year. So this is a very serious attempt by the city, beyond its regular mandate, in local government actually, but in very close cooperation with the Department of Education and the school safety branch, to bring extra value through the policing capacity of the city. What they also, when I speak to these SROs, these young people, I say to them, you're not just bringing a uniform in there, you're bringing an individual, yourself. And you must be prepared to look for every opportunity you can to add value. So one of the things that's been happening in Delft, and this is not peculiar to Delft, is the starting of marching teams. I'm sure you know, many of them know, marching teams. And they started in a small way with the school resource officers playing a leading role in cooperation with the Western Province Marching Association. And they had a little festival in Delft. And it was extraordinary to see these kids taking it seriously. And I can just give you one example of one of them that I spoke to a couple of weeks later, who had been in one of the teams. And I said to her, what was it like for you? And she said, well, it's discipline. And I thought, yeah, okay, it's a safe thing to say. But what did it feel like? And she said, I talk to people differently now. I talk to people differently. And I thought something has gone on just from that experience. Now, I only mentioned this in order to point out that once the school resource officers have been in the school for a while, they will be looking for opportunities in cooperation with the principal and the staff to add whatever they can. The other day, I was in one where both of the SROs happened to have a very good background in maths, of all things. And they were taking extra classes, filling in a gap when a maths teacher... Now, this is probably extremely irregular in some respects, but it's just an example of initiative and using opportunities to make the school a better place. Now, everybody's getting restless, including I, because I see you getting restless, and I think I just want to sum up by saying this. As Oscar has pointed out, safety comes from very many different participants. It should be a whole of society affair in which different contributors bring different strengths. And I'm finding it very interesting to be working with the city to see what local government within its mandate and stretching it a bit can do to assist in the safety of schools, which is such a central element in any community. The schools are the center of the community. Everybody has something to do with the school. You've either been to school, you live close to one, or you have kids at a school, or you have friends and relations. Everybody is connected. So if the school gets things right, it has a ripple effect of extraordinary power, right? And what we're trying to do here through this particular neighborhood safety team is to add strength and a stronger foundation to that capacity to make a difference, not just in the school, but in the whole neighborhood. It's a whole community thing. These officers are starting to be able to make contact with parents, follow up with them. The principal can ask, will you just have a chat to that parent when he or she comes in, just to explain what you're doing. And they're giving advice. So there's a lot still to be learned. There's a lot institutionally that we still have to figure out, reporting frameworks, funding, all those things, what kind of training. But I'm very excited, and I feel actually quite privileged to be part of this program in collaboration with education and using the city's capacities to do something which we hadn't really thought of the city having a role to do. So I think I'd better stop. You may have questions, and I'm sure time is getting on anyway. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Good afternoon, everybody. I'm an educator in the Delft schools, and one of the schools that Professor Cartwright is speaking is my school. Now, yes, there was skepticism initially when the program was rolled out into the schools from both educators as well as learners as well as the community. And without elaborating on the conditions in which we are working, I can honestly say that especially in my schools at my school, we don't know whether when you turn your back, you are safe. The picture has changed. Yet we still have drug dealings at the school. Yet, yes, we do still have children that's smuggling at the school. But we started the drill attempt, and we were with the officer, and we were 6 initially. It grew up till we have 60. And what we are doing currently is to roll it out where we will take on the primary schools. Because I believe if there's a community of practice within the Delft school, both from the primary school as well as the high schools, because these kids will obviously feed into us as our feeding schools. So discipline starts, and then in the afternoon what the program does is the kids from the neighboring primary schools come to our school, which is the high school, and they form part, not as my school's drill squad, but as the idea is to eventually have a complete drill squad that consists of schools within the Delft area. We do provide after school classes. We have teachers that assist and the SROs that assist. Just before coming here, the kids are writing their officers and teachers, availing themselves. So it is working. We still have a long way to go. But at least, colleagues, I feel safe to go to school in the mornings because my day changed. Thank you.
Wow. Any comments?
My name is Russell Andrews. I'm from Carrier Primary School in Atlantis. I can mention that we've got something, the city is providing us with, or we're part of the after-school game changers. So the city is providing us with security officers, but only from a certain time of day, from 11 o'clock until about 4 when the after-school game changer is on. And I can really say it does have a positive effect, and it helps us with access control at our school gates. It's just unfortunate that they're not there from the start of the school day, but it really does help. And the question that I have is, are there any possibility of this program that you were talking about coming out Atlantis way? Because we also have gangsterism around our school.
Yes, Atlantis was one of the 10 areas identified. So it's a matter of time. It's a very interesting process we're in right now, which is going from the first model building phase in one area and now taking it and testing it in another one, another equally large and complex and dangerous area. It's not just we're going to do it now, we're going to do it again, we're thinking through the process of taking experience from one place and then applying it in another and seeing if it works there, and if necessary, tweaking it. So it's a growing process, and within the next 5 years, unless something goes seriously wrong, there's some kind of political disagreement, which would be most unfortunate, we would hope to have this combination of policing and schools in many parts of Cape Town. There's one thing I left out. Part of the neighbourhood safety team also is something we call the focus table. I'll be going to it in Delft tomorrow afternoon. We meet every 2 weeks, and focus table is a very good description because there's a large table and there's people who sit around it and focus. And what they focus on is individual cases of involving social issues around mostly school children in the area. Now, it could be, the possibilities are endless of the horrible things that can happen, right, to kids. And so, sitting around the table are social workers from the city, so from social development, 3 representatives of the province social development, representative of the neighbourhood safety officers, and of the school resource officers, and myself kind of trying to understand and document and see how it's working. And so cases of great difficulty that individual social workers of the area have not been able to deal with are brought to the table and are discussed. And there has to be a recommendation at the end. It's not just come to talk. It's what are we going to do about this? A recommendation is made, obviously a referral, which then has to be reported back on the week that follows. But what's equally important, because these individuals are just kind of drop in the ocean, obviously, but what is equally important is the effect that this fortnightly meeting has had on the people themselves who take part in it, and seeing how the police presence and the other social development presence can together cooperate and can support one another. Because they know now, the social worker working in Delft knows now she can pick up the phone and she can call neighborhood safety officer and he'll be there within minutes. Either a crisis or to help her write up something or make a phone call, whatever it might be. They're there, the school resource officers and the neighborhood safety officers, what they have in common is that they have to be people who are enterprising and alert in their thinking. Right? Okay.
I just want to close with 1 or 2 comments. Firstly, saying thank you to Oscar. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for preparing and thank you for sharing with us. We've got a small gift for you. And then thank you to John. John, thank you for sharing with us what is happening in Delft. And I'm sure many of you are thinking, I just wish we could have some of those things in our schools. So let's try and be creative around what is possible. And I think that's why we call ourselves the School Leadership Forum, that wants to deepen this idea around school safety in schools.